Hello and good afternoon. We are going to give it a minute more, or maybe a couple of minutes more to let a few more people join, but welcome if you're already here to our second Service Patterns UK community call. Whilst you're joining, if you'd like to, in the chat, why don't you tell us where you're based, where you work, and what you're currently working on? I can see someone's got their hand up. Do you want to ask a question? Oh, it's gone down again.
No, sorry, Martin. I thought you wanted us to.
Oh,
just while we're waiting.
I mean, if you'd like to come off mute and tell us, that's fine too. I was meaning in the chat, but we've got a minute or two to fill.
Cool. Okay, put it in the chat.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. If you have just joined us in the last 30 seconds or so, we're going to give it one more minute before we kick off properly. But in the meantime, if you'd like to say hello in the chat, where are you based? What you're working on? Or if you want to tell us what you're having for your lunch, some of you might be eating whilst we talk. I've just come off quite a lengthy conversation about KFC's Pepsi pickle juice combo. Has anyone else seen an advert for this? Put a bit of pickle juice in your Pepsi. Yeah, no? Okay. This is definitely not Service Patterns chat. I'll have a look at what we're saying in no particular order. Williams, Student Loans Company, Chloe, London, MadeTech, Phil in West Yorkshire, very good. Hello, hello. Lots of people saying hi. Brilliant. All over the country and the organisations. Pickle and Pepsi. Yep. Okay, we're at 4 minutes past. I'm going to say let's get going properly. Feel free to continue talking in the chat. Yeah, let's get started. So, a quick bit of housekeeping before we dive into it properly. This session is being recorded, so if you want to, you can turn your camera off if you don't want to appear in the footage. Please remain on mute unless talking. We will let you know when there are opportunities to ask questions. Use the hands up button if you'd like to contribute. Feel free to use chat and reactions as we go. And this is a safe place. All are welcome. Please be kind. We are going to use a Padlet to gather your feedback and ideas. I will share the link as we go through, but if you want to get it open now so you're ready, please do so. You should be able to click on the link in the slide, or if you want to use another device, you could scan the QR code there. I will just drop a link into the chat as well, so that might be easier for some people. There we go. And today, speaking to you, you've got myself. So I'm Martin Ford Downs. I'm a lead service designer at the Ministry of Justice in the UK. I'm joined by Kirsty Sinclair, who is a service design lead at the Scottish Government. And our guest speakers today are Liam Collins, lead interaction designer at Digital Health and Care Wales, and Adrián Ortega, senior designer at the Centre for Digital Public Services. And the agenda for today, I'm going to do a quick bit of scene settings, just so we're all on the same page, and then we're going to hand over to our guest speakers talking about service patterns at the Centre for Digital Public Services in Wales. And then we'll come back and do a bit on the ambitions we have for this community this year and what we'd like to achieve. So this is not a detailed explanation of what service patterns are, but I do want to make sure we're all working from roughly the same set of assumptions. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of what we mean by service patterns in this community. We're actually going to talk about definitions later on, but for now I'm going to say that service patterns are replicable pieces of services that can be combined to build or shape end-to-end services. If an end-to-end service in the public sector is something like apply for a passport or book a driving test, we can break those services up into smaller parts that describe the main tasks a user has to complete. Each of those parts is a service pattern. They're larger in scope than the patterns we typically find in design systems like GDS, as they describe broader user tasks and are applicable to both digital and non-digital channels. One of the main usages of service patterns is to map journeys. So here's a very simple example. We'll look at a more complicated one later on. Each of these blocks is a potential service pattern. But in addition to that, a library of service patterns, similar to a design system, could contain a rich set of additional content, such as common user needs, frequent scenarios, recommended screen flows and components, and more. Over the past year, I've been part of several tests that have shown that within the UK government, at least, very different services share a lot of common fundamentals. For example, it doesn't matter what a user is applying for, we know there is a shared user need to know the outcome of their application and to track its progress. And if we can bring together those common elements in a library, it leads to more consistent user experiences and accelerates service design by avoiding rediscovering things we already know and making more time to learn what is new or different about the service that you're building. And the ambition for this community in 2026 is to create a service patterns library for the UK public sector that is open, practical, and built by the community. It would act as a shared starting point for organisations working with service patterns. I'll speak a bit more about that later in the call, but firstly, to our first question on the Padlet, please, if you can, add what have you done with service patterns so far in 2026? And it's okay if that's nothing. It's okay if it's just attend a call or read a blog. If you haven't used Padlet before, you'll see there's a plus symbol underneath the first column. If you want to use that, you can add a quick comment. The board is open for the duration of this call, so if you want to come back to it later, or if you want to get ahead and answer the next question, that's okay too. I can see a few popping in, so I like some of these have been given automatically allocated names. So the determined jellyfish has said, looked at case management patterns. Steve done some prototyping using the NHS service design manual. Nothing yet, sadly, from Responsible Hummingbird. That's okay, because this counts. Sarah R, map them for plan. Oh, they're popping in more quickly now than I can read. That's excellent. Thank you. We will be looking at all these later on as we go through the call. So thank you. I'm going to move us on to question 2. What are your service pattern ambitions for 2026? We've already got one there with 3 likes on it so far. To start building up a service patterns library. Excellent. That's my ambition too. To start doing them in my local council. Excellent. Thank you, Courteous Butterfly. I'm finding these names more amusing than I should do. Share more patterns across services rather than rework the same things. Exactly. Reuse. Brilliant. Cool. Great to see so many comments popping in here. I you know, dozens of them in the first column and loads popping in the second column. Thank you so much for your contributions. Right, well, I'm going to feel free to carry on adding things on the Padlet, but I'm going to move us on to our guest speakers. So please give a warm welcome to Liam, who again is lead interaction designer at Digital Health and Care Wales, and Adrián Ortega, senior designer at the Centre for Digital Public Services. And they're going to tell us about their work on service patterns at the Centre for Digital Public Services in Wales. So over to you guys, if you're happy to share your screen.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. 1 second. Can anyone say if you can see my slides full screen? Yeah?
Yeah, all good.
Looks
Cool.
good.
Thank you. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for having us. Thank you, Martin and Kirsty, for inviting us to come and share about our work, the work that we've been doing on service patterns in Wales. As you say, I'm Adrián Ortega. I'm the senior designer at the Centre for Digital Public Services, soon to be part of Welsh Government from next week, I think. We're going to be called Digital Public Services Wales since then. And I'm here with Liam Collins, the lead interaction designer at Digital Health and Care Wales. First of all, so we're going to be talking about the work that we've done for the past couple of years, especially last year, I'm going to talk a bit about the team behind the work, what we built, and what we're going to be doing next. But let me see if I can move to the next slide. This is a team in CDPS that we're working on exploring service patterns in Wales. It's a multidisciplinary team with a service designer, Alex, user research Mel, Sam, a delivery manager, and Aling as the senior product manager of the library itself. I guess you might be wondering, oh, what am I doing here with Liam then? But Liam was part of this team and the organization until the beginning of the year, where sadly for us, he decided to move to the HCW. This is a photo of last year when we went to Scotland to visit colleagues, Kirsty and the team in Scotland working on service patterns to do a bit of a knowledge exchange across the both nations, I guess. Liam, as I said, we've been working closely together on service patterns for the past year and since we joined CDPS, and he's been a huge part of the leading this work and shaping this work until now. He's gonna take over in a bit and he's gonna talk to you a bit more in detail about what we've been doing the past year, but to give you a general idea where the journey that's taking us here. This started in July 2023 with some exploratory work where we were looking into, I guess, a way to systematize design, service design across Wales. Then there was some discovery on a design system, and gradually the work was steered towards service patterns, I guess. After some concept testing and co-design and co-working with like different organizations, we built an MVP of a pattern library that we launched in December 2025, so 3 months ago. And currently we're hoping to publish in the next couple of weeks a new 3 patterns into the library. I'll talk a bit more about that in detail later. In terms of context for this work, this is not going to be new to anyone here. But I guess what we're trying to, what we observed was that many teams across the public sector, in what specifically, in our case, were redesigning the same services and the same journeys, often starting from scratch or almost from scratch. That meant, apart from a lot of duplication of effort and work for teams across the sector, it meant a lot of increased inconsistency in the delivery of these services from the perspective of the users, I guess. So that's what we were set out to explore and trying to address. And now I'm going to be handing over to Liam. As I said, he's going to be talking a bit more in detail about the work that we've done.
Cool, diolch. Thank you so much, Adrián. Can you see that next screen? Just want to check that it's moved over. Yeah, we're all good. Cool, amazing. Yes, so my name's Liam. So I'm currently lead interaction designer at Digital Healthcare Wales, but as Adrián says, worked at CDPS for 3 years, and the second half of that time was all around exploring this wonderful topic. So if anyone has seen me talk about it before, apologies. You've probably all at some point heard me say, if you do know me, heard me say the 2 words service patterns, because I use them in most days, I would say, even now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach. And as Adrián says, like, CDPS's remit is around Welsh public services. So you've got like a whole bunch of organizations, over 200 organizations, I think, Adrián, pick me up on my stats, a lot of organizations. And so with that, when we started exploring the idea of like, as you say, Adrián, standardizing design, or rather like design system kind of shaped stuff, it became clear really, really quickly that actually it's a very complex environment that you're going into there. It's, you know, lots of different organizations with their own brands, their own style guides, their own, I guess, at like a UI level, it's hard to standardize those. It felt hard to standardize those things. Not to say that can't be done at some point, but at that stage, certainly it felt like that was going to be a really, really hard, you know, big task, a big ship to move. So like the idea kind of started around, well, what is consistent about those all those different services across all those different organizations, what is consistent about those is the types of journeys that people are going on. And I think I started out kind of calling it like reusable user flows, maybe is what it wasn't a thing, like I didn't know what it was called. And then kind of hit upon some of the work that had been done and these two word service patterns. But it felt like in Wales, again, the complexity, I mean, it's complex wherever you do it, even within a singular organization, it's complex, like trying to standardize anything. But certainly our remit was across, how do you do that across 200 organizations or 200 plus? So it was a very conceptual thing. So we started off with this design sprint, which was like a 5-day way of just going, let's just get something down to help people to sort of share a vision about what we mean when we talk about service patterns in our context. So it wasn't like a massive investment. Obviously, it's still an investment in time, but it wasn't like we were dedicating months and months to this piece of work. We took 5 days for 2 people. It was myself and a service designer. And we took 5 days out of our calendar with no other meetings, which was obviously lovely. And we just set about getting something that people could view and tear apart and sort of just have conversations about. So it became a real just prototype of a concept. And then what we did is we moved into this, once that kind of people could visualize then what we were talking about, it became slightly less abstract. And what we did is we just took that prototype that we developed there into some workshops. So we did 5 workshops. There were 4 with different Welsh public sector organizations, and then 1 which was through our communities of practice that we were running, where we brought together a whole bunch of different designers from a bunch of different organizations, and got them in the same room. And they were sort of designing flows and testing flows with each other and stuff like that. So what we were trying to do on this was, again, the complexities of this is very complex, very, very conceptual. We were trying to just co-design this concept beyond this tiny little prototype we had. We were trying to co-design that concept in real life sort of scenarios, because it felt like what we learned from one organization might be completely different from what we learned from another organization, or from another. So we felt like going out to these organizations and, you know, we were running through the prototype itself. We were getting them to do some mapping. So they were getting post-it notes and kind of trying to map out some of their services, but using the very lo-fi prototype that we built, to see whether it was possible to build journeys specific to their services based upon these. I think it was just the booking journey that we started off with. So that had a lot of testing. And we were just trying to see whether they could map out digital journeys using these as a starting point. And we learned that by and large, yes, that was absolutely possible. In some of the earlier workshops, they helped us to sort of realize that maybe the flow was not quite in the right order. The steps that we had in the flow was not quite in the right order. So then in the next workshop, we were able to just iterate that and then test that second version of the flow, and it never changed since then. We were testing the guidance that we had put alongside these steps. I did drop the link in the chat, by the way, to the pattern library at the moment. So we were testing, sorry, I've just seen the question coming around what was in that prototype. Yeah, so it was a prototype in Figma, and it had just a landing page for the library, and then it had one journey in there. We'll show you what that thing looks like in a bit. Or again, you can click on the link to the live version. It wasn't too dissimilar, and amazingly, it didn't change that much really from that thing that we did in 5 days to actually what is live now. The guidance got better. We learned, it became more robust. We added things, we changed things and stuff. But the general kind of way that we were presenting patterns and kind of talking about patterns didn't really change. And as I say, we tested that with a whole bunch of different organizations. It just developed, and it got more depth behind it, I suppose is the best way of saying it. So yeah, we were trying to identify like shared needs. We were trying to map common flows with them, things like that. But overall, I would say it was very layered testing. You know, we were testing an early prototype, what made sense, what didn't make sense. We were testing the flows themselves. Were they in the right order? Can people use them to map? We were also, alongside this, we did an activity that we found to be really, really useful for organizations kind of, I guess, understanding about how service patterns could help. So it became more like a knowledge building or the light switch sort of moment, I suppose, in those workshops, was we essentially gave we put a big roll of whiteboard on the wall, the ones you can roll out, and we drew 7 categories on there, so 7 columns, and we just put our 7 categories that we had at the time, which was like apply, book, testing me now, check, request, tell, register, pay. Is that 7? Anyway, those, if they're 7, we put all those on the wall, and then we got everybody to write down as many services in their organization that they could think of onto post-its, and then they put them into the various categories on the wall. And that act of kind of seeing, oh, I've got like 15 apply services here, or I've got like 22 check services here, or whatever it was, that became a really good kind of moment to being like, oh, so I can see maybe why this would actually benefit me. So it became a good kind of learning moment, I would say. Anyway, all of this is to say, this was about us taking a very small part of a concept, a small part of a prototype, and there was loads of unfinished bits with bits that didn't work. But that was kind of the point of it, is we didn't want to get too far down the line in one direction and realize it wasn't going to work for all of these different things. So we kind of fleshed that concept out through the testing with different organizations that helped us to figure out all of the complexities as we went. So I'm not going to delve into quotes too much, but just to kind of say, like, people were very, very positive about it through the workshops that we did. There was lots of lovely comments that came through on them, lots of positivity about like, when will this be available, when can we start using this? And then further than that, it was organizations going off and then sort of working on service patterns that were more I guess specific to their own organizational needs. So that was really awesome to kind of see. And again, we went into it going, we don't know if this will work. Basically, we feel like it might, but we don't really know. So it was really good to kind of see that thing get fleshed out with people, and it did work. So hopefully you can see the screen. The specifics of it, wording doesn't matter too much, but this is a way that we kind of try to look at the language and the fidelity of the patterns, and it all became around these things that we were calling levels. And I know, like Martin, you mentioned some of this stuff at the start where you were talking about clickable parts of journeys and stuff like that, and obviously that's the universally understood language of service patterns now, which is amazing. People are like, they're the Lego shaped bricks, or the whatever. Everyone's got different analogies of it. It's the layers of a sandwich, I don't know. But what we kind of came to, and a lot of this as well was through this the early days of the service patterns kind of working group, and us going up and working with Kirsty and the wonderful team up there. We spent so much time trying to figure out the language and the fidelity of this. We kind of understand that these are clickable parts of journeys, yes, but like, how specific can you get before it becomes too specific that it doesn't work for multiple teams, or in our case at that point, multiple organizations, but equally, how zoomed out can you get with it that it then becomes too broad and doesn't work because it's too broad and it doesn't really offer anything. So it became so much of this tiny little needle on a dial, like just moving it a little bit that way, and then a little bit that way, and a little bit this way. So we came upon this thing that we were then saying, so level 1 is your journey types. That's like apply for something, register for something, book, request, check, tell, pay for something. They were the 7 that we were building from at the moment, right? And Adrián can speak on where that is now. Then we were building each of those journeys upon these repeated steps, right? So we had things like, starting a service. We had things like check your answers, confirmation pages. Now, the wonderful thing is those things exist, right? So those wonderful like confirmation pages, brilliant. I can go to the gov.uk design system and I can get a really fantastic content pattern that's got loads of testing, or wherever, whatever, insert your own design system here. But we were able to like start pairing those things then into the various steps. And you go, actually, so in the guidance, and again, if you click on the link, you can have a little, sorry, plugging the link now. But if you have a little look at the link, you can see on there in the guidance, we're saying this step is about doing this. The user is trying to achieve this thing. You can go and find a content pattern for this particular step at this stage over here, and pointing at those wonderful existing resources. And each of those are then those individual actions. So just to give you an example of this, on like a on a service. So this would be applying for a single person discount on council tax. That's a particular service that exists, okay? You can see it's an apply journey, and then that apply journey is then made up of these steps. So apply, ask for user details. I won't go into the details of why there's 2 of those steps, but there are. Verify your identity, blah, blah, blah. So you can see that this particular thing is just being mapped straight into a live service. And you can see that, like, as I say, we're pointing to those different content patterns that already exist. So there's one that we were using from the MOJ design system, which was around like uploading a file. We don't need to recreate that thing. It's already there. It's already got testing. It's awesome. Cool. Then you've got the content pattern from the gov.uk design system, and so on and so forth. So pointing to all these different existing things. Okay, the other thing that we did during this time, before I hand back to Adrián, is I was going to talk about the citizen testing that we did. So we went and tested, we built 3 this is when we were still working on book pattern, okay? We built 3 prototypes: book a bulky waste collection, book travel vaccinations, and book a room in the library. So the UI was kind of different on these, the content was different on these. You were meant to sort of vaguely simulate you are on a local authority website, which was Pontypandy Council, which any Fireman Sam fans in the house, that's where that is. Anyway, so we built these, and then we went and tested them with different citizens, with a number of citizens, sorry. And we were trying to see whether the journeys that were being built from the service pattern library guidance, whether they worked for people. So we tested with practitioners during the workshops, but then now we were testing the end sort of flows, I suppose. And again, we learned some really interesting things from there that we then went and iterated in the guidance itself. And again, we had like this, we had lots of really cool quotes from there. You know, sometimes you're in some user research sessions and you have the golden quote that comes out. And there was ones like this that were people saying, like, if online services have similar formats, it makes life a lot easier. You don't have to relearn things, etc., etc. There were some really great quotes that came from that. And again, there were people saying things like, oh, this is easier because I've seen it before. So by the time they got to the 3rd prototype, they were like, oh, I recognize this as something I've seen already. So yeah, so there was that testing. And then when we got into the MVP part of it, and this is, Adrián, I'll hand back to you in a sec. I've just got 2 slides left. As we were getting into the MVP, we were like, what do we want to launch? Or what can we launch, really? We kind of had co-designed some of these other patterns, as we said, with a number of different designers around Wales, but they hadn't been tested yet beyond that. So we put those down for a second, and we just focused on the 2 that had done some more testing. They had some more robust testing behind them. So number 1 was the book pattern, which was tested in the way that I've already talked about. And number 2 was the apply pattern. And this was actually built, we went the other way round on this one, right? So we went back to a previous project that we'd done at CDPS, which was around council tax reduction. It's actually the flow I showed you earlier around this applying for single person discount. So that was a project that we did and tested and iterated upon and stuff like that. We learned that was a flow that worked. And we kind of zoomed out of it, as it were, and we patternized that entire flow, and we patternized it into an apply flow. And then what we did beyond that is went and did some testing with another organization in Wales to test that on one of their live services as well. And again, iterated upon what was learned there. So it felt like those 2 patterns, they'd had a bit more robust testing underneath them, right? But there's these other ones sat waiting in the wings, which I'm going to hand back. That's a perfect segue to hand back to Adrián, if you want to take control, and he'll talk to you about where it is at now.
Thank you, Liam. 1 second, let me take control. Okay. Can you see my screen again?
Yeah.
So this is a short clip on the service pattern library as it is at the moment. If you haven't clicked on that link, I have the spoiler. So as Liam said before, right now we started, what we have published is a book and apply pattern. And what we have in each one of them is some sort of like a visual digital interaction flow and some guidance on each one of these steps. Something that we said before, and Liam also mentioned, is that we are trying, we're not trying to be prescriptive with this. This is to give people in Wales a starting point that they can then adapt to their own context and needs and whatnot. In terms of what we publishing now. I think that I mentioned that before as well. We're publishing 3 new patterns, hopefully next week. These patterns are going to be in request, tell, and report. Originally, at the beginning of the year, we set out the goal was to work on request, tell, and register. But after some work on register, we decided to pause it for now, as it needs. We thought that it needs a bit more thinking on our part before we can publish something that is useful. At the same time, we were not originally working on report. We were considering that as part of the third pattern, but while thinking about it and working on it with this, we realized that even though the user intent on a service about tell and report, services might be similar, the expected outcome are different, and we decided that it was a good opportunity to think of them as 2 separate different things. In terms of what we're exploring next, as I said before, we're moving towards government soon. So in the pre-election period, so there's expectations of potential change ahead. So we cannot commit a lot on what we're going to be doing next, but these are our thoughts at the moment. We decided to take a bit of a step back and think more in detail about definitions. As in service definitions, service patterns, elements of them, how they interact with each other and whatnot. So the presentation at the beginning of this, of Martin, and all this conversation in this session is great, because that's exactly where we are and what we were planning to do next. So it's great to be involved in these conversations. Another thing that we were all this thinking, we are hoping to document it in the service manual for Wales as a complement to the service pattern library, as something that we identified doing some research and talking to digital practitioners across Wales, is that the service pattern and the library needed some guidance, some more guidance to support it. People who were not familiar with our work and the work on service patterns didn't find it easy to get their heads around the idea of service patterns, I guess. Another thing that we are hoping to explore next is a pay and check patterns. We have in our plans also to iterate the existing patterns already that we have published, and also the library itself. And finally, something that is quite important to us as part of, I guess, socializing these ideas in Wales is working with others. So we are considering how we can involve the different communities of practice in Wales, and this one, I guess, as well, in our thinking. And I think that that's it from us. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us. If you have any questions, we're happy to have a chat now. I don't know how long we have. And then our emails are over there if you want to have another chat outside of here as well anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam and Adrián. It's great to see it like in real life, actually implemented, working. Thank you so much. We've got about 5 minutes for questions now. So if anyone would like to raise their hand and come off mute to ask a question, please do. We'll have a look in the chat as well if no one wants to. But it'd be great to hear someone come off mute and ask a question if you have one. Whilst we're waiting, here we go. We've got Izzy. Go ahead,
Hi,
Izzy.
I'm going to ask a question I nearly always ask in these things. So this is fantastic, right? But will there be a continued commitment to actually resourcing and maintaining and developing all that great work that you've done? Because we so often see, don't we, that great things get lost once they're launched. And it's always such a shame when you see something that's so good. So it's about, making sure this continues and gets, like you're saying, socialized and used by all the people that would benefit from it.
That's a great question that I'm not sure how an answer to. As I said, as we move into West government, we have a lot of uncertainty of what we're going to be doing next. For now, for the next couple of quarters, at least the next 6 months, we have a dedicated team working on this. So hopefully we'll show value enough to our new bosses for us to continue working on this and giving the resource and the time and space as well to continue on this. Hopefully that answers your question, but it's difficult to say at the moment.
Thanks, Izzy. Liam, Adrian, was there any other questions in the chat here that you'd like to have a go at?
I'm just having a little look now. So people are interested in the register one. Complications you encounter with the register journey. I think it's kind of like, Kirsty, you posted in the chat, like interested to know the differences between apply and register. I think exactly, you've hit the nail on the head with your description of what we found is like on the surface, are they actually just quite similar things? I think there's a thing there around like the naming of stuff that we have. As organizations, we might name something that is like named around the business needs of it or the business version of it. You know, we need someone to register for this thing. But actually, like the user might not see that as any different from applying for something, or potentially the other way around. You know, so I know that we. Again, I'm not obviously I don't you know, so I can't talk about that where you are now, Adrián. But I know at the time we were definitely feeling that when we were like, oh, we have these two things, and we had our definitions were like, okay, so apply is probably when it's more complex. You have probably multiple eligibility, like kickoff points, I suppose is the best way of saying it, like big questions. If you're not eligible, if you're not a whatever person living on your own, you are not going to be eligible for this. So there's no point in you completing the rest of the form, for example. Whereas register might not need so many sort of like stages by which the user can be not kicked off is the wrong way of saying it, but you know what I mean? Like you're likely to be eligible for this thing. So that was how we were treating it at the time. But I think as we started kind of just learning more about it as we were going, we were thinking, are they different? I don't know. I'm not sure. So I don't think by the time I left, we weren't focusing on trying to come to a conclusion for that.
I think that also doing some research, we found that lots of registered services, at least in Wales, and the ones that we identified actually were application processes in disguise. And that's part of why we posted other services that were proper registering. We were looking into register a birth, register. So basically we narrowed down services like register a birth, a death, and a marriage. What we didn't realize until talking to some people is that these are actually central government services just delivered locally. So that's another reason why we decided to post this and put it to the side. Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question as well.
Well, I'm going to need to move us on to the next part of today's agenda. But again, thank you, Liam and Adrián. If folks want to maybe continue having any conversations in the chat, please do. And I guess, Liam and Adrián, you can see what's going on there. Feel free also to use the any other feedback column on the Padlet if you want to put something there, and I'll share that with Liam and Adrián later too. But again, thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, really inspiring and encouraging just to see it kind of go from the theory that a lot of us have been talking about for a while to some proper reality. Right, so for the second half of this call, the time we've got left, I want to talk a bit about what we'd like this community to achieve. Part of it is learning and sharing, just like we've heard from just now, but part of it is also trying to make a thing. I shared this earlier, but just to reiterate, the proposed ambition for this community is to create a service patterns library for the UK public sector that is open, practical, and built by the community, a shared starting point for organisations working with service patterns. So firstly, why do I think that's realistic? We know from testing, and there's various people in this call that have been involved in different tests, that for UK government departments, at the very least, they have very similar service pattern needs and could benefit from a shared resource. It's likely that they and others will need local variations and specific things to their particular use cases. But for the most part, we're confident there is a core set of repeatable elements that we think we could agree on. We're less certain, but still reasonably confident that local government organisations and other national governments like Scotland and Wales have similar needs too. But being transparent, this community is billing itself as public sector, but there's bits that we don't know enough about quite yet. So other types of public sector organisation that might have different journeys. There's not much retail journey in government, but I was having a conversation with the Met Office. I think some of you are on the call recently, and it got me thinking about some of the journey types that you might have that are not here yet. So we're not saying this is perfect, but an area to explore further. So to get there, here's where we think or what we think we would need to do. Firstly, define service patterns. I don't think this is massively controversial, but we don't always mean exactly the same thing. And then to agree what the service patterns themselves are. Again, not necessarily locking it down, saying you are committed to these ones and no others, but what are the most common ones that we could share across our organizations? And then to think about the type of content you would find in a service pattern library, like common user needs, scenarios, recommended components. How would that work at a cross government or across public sector level when we all have different design systems? We'd want to document with examples the ways to use service patterns, because we've identified a number of use cases, and it's not just about designers, it can be other types of stakeholder and user as well. Publish some case studies with examples of their implementation and benefits, and then publishing that all and maintaining it in a publicly accessible service patterns library somewhere online that everyone can use. My hope is we can tackle this one step at a time, and we're going to try and make a start on the first two bullet points on the rest of the call today. So definitions. This is not, we're not going to try and craft the perfect definition on this call right now. But if you could please take a moment on the Padlet, question 3 is, what should be included in a shared definition of service patterns? I'm not looking for a polished definition. I'm not even looking necessarily for sentences. It could be single words, just any ideas you can contribute, one words, themes. What do you think would need to be included? On the screen, there are a couple of examples here. The first one is the one I shared at the start of the call. I think one of these is yours, Kirsty, from Scottish Government website. And I can't remember where the other one came from, but there's a few floating around out there. So like I say, if you haven't got the Padlet open, there's the link and the QR code again. Please add your thoughts. Some of the things coming in so far, shared terminology, examples, intention, variations of words that work as substitutes. I'm going to let people continue to ponder that because I'm keen to show you the next part of this. So the next part is, what are the patterns themselves? But firstly, a little bit of context setting. Over the past year or two, we've seen two main models of service pattern libraries emerge. One starts with a smaller set of service patterns for things like request, apply, and appointments. And that's the example you can see at the top left of your screen. And then they subdivide into lower level things that are maybe called sub patterns. And then beneath those, you may have another layer, which is sometimes referred to as tasks. The example on the left shows a mixture of content from both the Ministry of Justice and the Department for Work and Pensions, where they've been exploring service patterns. The other model, the one on the right, is having a single layer where all of the elements are called service patterns, and that what you're looking at there is Kirsty's work from the Scottish Government. We don't have tons of time right now to talk about the pros and cons of these two approaches, but we felt it was important that we try to harmonise this to make it easier for us to share and reuse going forward. I think there are pros and cons to each version. I think the left side with maybe 8, 9, or 10 high-level service patterns are potentially easier to navigate, but then it can get a bit tricky when you have to decide if something, easier to navigate, but it can get tricky when you have to start navigating down through lower levels. The right-hand side is all there to begin with, but maybe it's slightly more overwhelming when you're looking at 30 to 40, and maybe there's slightly trickier conversations about when something is big enough to be a service pattern rather than maybe just being a component or like the sort of pattern you'd find in digital design systems today. The conclusion, I'm going to turn off this laser pointer. There we go. The conclusion we've reached for now, and we're really keen to get your feedback on this, and that's question 4 on the Padlet, is to try and go towards a single layer view, but with a solution for how we maintain a higher level view as well, which I'll show you in a moment. I'm really aware that this is different from what you have just seen from Leon and Adrián. So I'm not saying there is one right model here, but we think there's a way we can bridge the gap between both of them with this approach. What you're looking at right now is heavily inspired by the view of things you just saw from Kirsty. A few of us looked at a number of different service pattern libraries that were out there and tried to harmonize them all into one single set at roughly the same size for each pattern. Something that's different in this one from what you saw on Kirsty's was the section at the bottom called patterns only used by service providers. So things that we might do. The Department for Work and Pensions, for example, needs to be able to make decisions about people's applications. That's not usually something that a citizen user would do, but it's something that a service provider would need to do. This is very much a work in progress, and we'd love your feedback on it. And if you want to, and we'll share the links again at the end, but there's a link to a Miro board there. You'll need to use the password Service Patterns 2026, where you can get into it and look at it in a little bit more detail. Here on this next slide, sorry, I'm fighting the slides a little bit, is an example of how we think we can start to use these to map out journeys. We've tried to show both the end user journey and the service provider journey. This example, again, thanks to Lindsay Stevens, Department for Work and Pensions, it's about getting financial support. And one of the complexities we found with this is that we need to draw a distinction between what's the sorry, I think I lost my connection there, but I'm back. In this journey, it's not always the case that you need to schedule a meeting about getting financial support, but it might happen. So if you squint, you can see there's this schedule service pattern in the second row on the journey map there. That's also on the Miro board, and looking for thoughts and feedback on that. And then we would still want to build this out into a library that has rich content in it to help you build your services. So click through to declare. We still think we can get to common shared user needs, scenarios, case studies, screen suggestions. I really like the way you've laid that out, Liam and Adrián, in the example you showed. Component suggestions, that might get trickier because if this is going to work for lots of organizations, you have your own design systems, but it's the sort of thing we need to think about. And then coming back again to this, the value of this higher level view, and I'm really keen on how this can be more than just a design tool, but a way that organizations can actually think about how they organize and understand the services they offer, as a way of recognizing you might do 100 things, but maybe only fundamentally you do 3 different things, just with lots of variations. This level of understanding still has value. And the idea we're experimenting with is something that I'm currently calling starter packs, might need a better name, but what if we still had the concept of apply as a service pattern at a high level, but we give you a pre-identified starter journey where we say, these are the 10 or 15 service patterns that we think are most likely required for your type of journey. Here's a starter journey map. Of course, validate it for your particular service, tweak it, make the adjustments you need, but giving people still an easy starting point for things like apply, booking appointments. So I've gone through that relatively quickly, but the next question on the Padlet is, what is your initial reaction to this model for a service pattern library? I was going to do a bit of Q&A at the end, but as we've got a little bit of time now, and I've just thrown quite a lot at you, I would be very interested to hear if anyone wants to come off mute, raise their hand, ask a question, make a comment, or to do so in the chat for a couple of minutes before we wrap up. I'm just looking in the chat here. So Caitlin, there's a link there with Kate Tarling's work on service ownership. Absolutely, that's something that has been in the back of my thinking. I would reach for my book, except I loaned it to a service designer on my team just last week. So is Kirsty got you? Is that you reaching for yours? Excellent. Yeah. It's a bit of a game for me to always try to grab the book that's referred to in the chat live. I failed this time. Does anyone have any comments or questions they want to come off? Or Kirsty, if you want to chip in on any of your thoughts? Putting you on the spot. You don't have to. Oh, Carolina.
Let's go first.
Caroline.
Yes.
Go for it.
Should I go first? No?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Caro from Islington Council. I think this is really, really good, but also it will be interesting to see, besides that, if we are implementing new technologies, maybe what are the requirements of that technology to work with? Like, for example, if you have a journey about like applying, what is the requirements that the technology needs to ask the resident to have that information and make an automation? It's just like my team is working a lot right now with automation and AI. And sometimes the issue that we have is like, we don't know what is the information that we need to ask residents. And that tends to happen in different applications, in different services in the council, if that makes sense. So it will be interesting to have, yes, the journeys, but also like a set of like pre-filled requirements depending on the journey. Like if it's an application for something is name, address, etc. I know that is going to vary depending on the service, but maybe something like that can be also interesting.
I think Kirsty, you've got some good thoughts about like tying into like your technical architect team and whatnot. My suspicion is this is going to have to be at a probably like a local organizational level rather than across the whole of us. But but yeah, no, I agree with the idea. Kirsty, do you want to say anything on that one?
Something that I suppose we could maybe start testing as a big group is as more of us are starting to document some of these patterns, these sort of applies and requests and these kind of big standard journeys, is the content that goes into that documentation. I've started to script some up recently. Is almost kind of trying to do the job of the conversation that you would have as a designer when you were if you were drawing out that journey with people, and doing all those prompts and nudges of like, are you sure you need to collect that? What are you going to do with that data? Where are you going to store it? Who's going to be using that? How long does it last for? Kind of stuff. So finding a way to kind of document all of those nudges and question asking that we do in conversation and then sort of facilitation, but recording it in such a way that it has that link to how you're actually using that underpinning technology and what you're requesting of that technology that goes sort of inside that pattern, I think could be really helpful for to kind of use this community to test and to try out and to see what needs to be there.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Kirsty.
Like there. Mm-hmm. We'll build
anyone
it.
else-
We'll test it.
If anyone else wants to raise their hand, please do so. I'm just looking at the chat, and Jim has asked, could this work integrate with the existing GovUK design system? It's not my job to say what the design system should do, but like I have an idea in my head about this being. I would love service patterns to be the starting point to pointing you towards things in the design system, which is not to say that you can't go straight to the design system, but for central gov, at the least, if we can make clear recommendations from the be notified service pattern to the likely components and patterns for digital interfaces that you would need to use, then yes, I think there are and I've mentioned earlier in the chat that I know that GDS did a discovery recently into service patterns as a concept. I haven't seen the outcome of that yet. I think there will be practical questions about who should own this, who would fund it. Part of the reason for this community approach right now is to not be too bound by that and to see if we can do something grassroots together. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be integrated in the future. GDS folk here. Good question, Kirsty. Okay, we're just about out of time. So on the Padlet, I'll leave that open for a day or two. There's a 5th column there for any feedback. Please use that if you have anything to contribute that you've not had the chance to say, including about the format of this call, what you would like to hear from the future, if you have any suggested topics or guest speakers that you would like to hear from. This is very new. We're not running to a particular format or cadence yet. I'd like to try and hit maybe once a quarter as a minimum, but we only want to do things when we've got something interesting for you to say or share. So please use the feedback column there. However, for now, thank you very much to, firstly, everyone for attending. And again, to my co-presenters, Kirsty, Liam, and Adrián. If you would like to view that service pattern menu prototype, there's a link on screen. If you would like to join the mailing list to receive invites to future calls, you can sign up there. Also keep an eye out on LinkedIn. We've made a new resource list, and please forgive my very shoestring website, but every example I've identified or we've identified of service patterns, of useful blogs, to recordings from past presentations, anything useful we've found so far is on that list there. If you've got anything to add, let me know. And if you'd like to watch a recording of the previous community call, our first one from December, that's available on YouTube as well. Okay, right, we'll wrap things up. Enjoy the rest of your Thursdays. Thank you, everyone, for coming along, and hope to see you again in a few months' time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See y'all.
Thanks for.
Thank you.
Thank you.